Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. As a Michigan fan myself, it's hard to be disappointed with what Sherrone Moore, this Michigan program, have done to date in the transfer portal. It's been a lot of good players, but it's been a lot of good players at positions that, us Michigan fans wanted to be addressed heading into 2025. You look at the inside of the defensive line, losing guys like Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. Michigan needed bodies. Well, we needed numbers. We needed depth in the middle of that defensive line. They go out and land Damon Payne, Trey Williams, Justice Haynes, obviously a massive addition at the running back spot. There are still certain positions that I think us Michigan fans want Michigan to address. I think more specifically at the wide receiver spot. And it's been kind of slow. You landed Donovan McCulley early on in the process. Since then, it's kind of been radio silence. And I think there's an element of Michigan just being patient at the wide receiver position and being very selective in terms of what wide receivers that they want to go after. But I think a lot of Michigan fans probably come together and agree on the fact that, hey, we got to get some more difference makers in this pass catcher room heading into 2025, especially as you try to usher in the Bryce Underwood era. Now, I want to have a conversation of a couple more wide receivers that are popping up for this Michigan program in the transfer portal. But I want to start with the conversation about Michigan continues to go after a boundary cornerback. And they're going after guys that they think can come in and start right away. A lot of y'all in the comment section kind of have my same stance, and that is, look, I'm not going to say no to a good player at the boundary cornerback spot. But I do look at that position and say that's one of those positions that, yeah, you lose a guy like Will Johnson. Yeah, you lose Amir Hall. I'm still sitting here and saying I'm pretty confident in the young cornerbacks that are coming back or coming into this program in 2025. Want to have a conversation of one more cornerback, talk about what this cornerback room is going to look like going into 2025, and then get into the main event. And that is, hey, more wide receiver options for this Michigan program. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Michigan fans, the amount of support y'all continue to show to the boys has been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And I would like to hear y'all's thoughts and opinions on the cornerback position as well, because that to me looks like a position I feel pretty good about, but it's pretty clear that Sherrone Moore wants to add one more body to that cornerback room. And let's start with, a cornerback that's kind of popped up. Former Washington Husky Thaddius Dixon. This kid's really good. And this falls under the category of, look, I'm not trying to just bring in any kind of boundary cornerback, because I think we have good boundary cornerbacks on this team. Thaddius Dixon would be a guy that it's hard to say no to. You go back to his time at Washington, specifically in 2024, faced over 51 targets, only gave up 23 catches, a 45% completion percentage when targeted, 10 pass breakups, 2 interceptions in his career, with a 13% missed tackle rate. Thaddius Dixon was one of the best cornerbacks in a Washington Husky secondary that was one of the best units in the country. This kid, we all know, can play. And you add a guy like Thaddeus Dixon, you start looking at the cornerback room, and this is kind of where I get into, look, I like the young talent. Jair Hill going into year 3, I think is going to be a stud. You look at Josiah Edmond going into year 2, I think he's going to be a really good football player. You have a guy in Shamari Earls coming in the 2025 class, and look, I don't often bang the table for a true freshman to have opportunities, or relying on true freshmen to come in and play. Shamari Earls would be one of those few cornerbacks that I look at and say, I'm pretty comfortable with him playing a role within this Michigan defense year 1 as a true freshman. In fact, that's why I think he committed to Michigan, because he knows he's going to have an opportunity to make an impact year 1. You add Thaddeus Dixon, to me, it's, what we did last year with Amir Hall, or like we did 2 years ago with Josh Wallace. It's always a good idea. You can never have enough quality depth all over your roster, and especially with the cornerback room for Michigan that, is quite frankly pretty young. Jair Hill going into year 3. Zeke Berry, it kind of depends on what we decide to do with Zeke Berry. Do we stick him out still at the boundary? Do we bring him back into nickel? Josiah Edmonds going to be a redshirt freshman. Shamari Earl is going to be a true freshman. So from the outside looking in, I guess it kind of does make sense to go bring in an experienced cornerback. I think the conversation a lot of Michigan fans are having is, look, if we have a finite time and resources to use in the transfer portal, is it worth it to be going after one of these huge names at the cornerback spot? I think Sherrone Moore, Lamar Morgan, Wink Martindale obviously see that as a spot on the football team that Michigan wants to address. Now, getting into, again, what I think is the main event, and that is where Michigan goes in the wide receiver room. And this is probably the only aspect that I'm a little bit frustrated in, is I feel like there's been a lot of really good wide receivers that have hit the transfer portal, and Michigan hasn't really been a real player in a lot of the best guys. The flip side of that is that I think this is a very deep wide receiver transfer portal class. And so you look at where you want to spend your resources. You could go out and get into bidding wars for guys like Eric Singleton or a guy like Barrion Brown, or you could look a little bit down the ladder and say, look, there's a lot of good wide receivers that probably aren't going to cost us an arm and a leg, like a guy like Eric Singleton would. True Edwards is probably my favorite target that has emerged. I think Michigan's pushing to get him on campus. You look at True Edwards, I think at first you start with 6'3", 200 pounds. That's clearly where Michigan wants to go in the wide receiver room. Yeah, I think we want bigger bodied wide receivers. Now you look at True Edwards, you kind of assume he's, a big boundary wide receiver. He played 90% of his snaps in 2024 at Louisiana Tech from the slot. And this is a guy that's a human joystick with the football in his hands. You look at him and say 6'3", 200 pounds, you kind of assume he's a big vertical threat. That's not really the case. Where he does his damage is yards after the catch. You take a look at his numbers. Over 100 targets at Louisiana Tech in 2024. That tells me they wanted to get this kid involved. He caught 78 of them. And so you're talking about an 80% completion percentage when True Edwards is targeted, had over 490 yards after the catch, 14 missed tackles forced. True Edwards, to me, is a guy that's a difference maker with the football in his hands. And this might be the number one thing us Michigan fans are looking for. A guy that when he has the football in his hands, you're kind of holding your breath. And I also think it certainly helps Bryce Underwood, where, hey, you want to break in a freshman quarterback, create some easy throws that we can hit some explosive plays behind. Go get it to a guy like True Edwards in those short, quick, intermediate route trees, and let him do the rest in terms of yards after the catch with the football in his hands. This one would make a lot of sense. He's kind of, to me, one of those diamonds in the roughs at the wide receiver spot. While a lot of other teams are focusing on those top players, I think True Edwards would come in and be pretty dang close to our wide receiver one right off the bat. Now, another name that I am a massive fan of that it does sound like Michigan might be pursuing is Wake Forest wide receiver Donavon Green. Now, as a Wake Forest alum, Michigan football fan, Wake Forest alum, you look at Donavon Green, one, this would be cool for me to see, but I think secondly, and more importantly, Donavon Green's potential is next level stuff. At 6'2", 210, he is a freaky athlete for the size. The storyline for Donavon Green is he just hasn't played all that many healthy seasons. He's been at Wake Forest. I remember I was still a student at Wake Forest when he was a freshman. That tells you how long this kid's been at the college football landscape. He was awesome as a freshman. He clearly our best wide receiver as a true freshman, or at the very least the most gifted. And then ever since that year, he struggled with injuries. He's missed 2 seasons entirely with injuries. That's why he still has eligibility remaining and has only really played 1 full season. And so there is that red flag about Donavon Green staying healthy. As a Michigan fan, I look at Michigan and say, we got to take some risks. Donavon Green, it would make sense to bring him in and say, hey, if he stays healthy for 12 plus games, you're getting arguably wide receiver one in your offense. If he doesn't stay healthy, that's unfortunate, but we got some other wide receivers we can rely on. Michigan is, I wouldn't use the term desperate, but really needs some difference makers on the outside. Donavon Green can be that guy if he stays healthy. I think it's very much worth Michigan going after and getting him. And I think that the favorite thing about him is 18.2 yards per catch. I mean, we're looking for more explosiveness in the pass catcher room. Donavon Green can give you that. Last one, and probably the biggest target for Michigan, that's Caden Robinson. from App State, hits the transfer portal, immediately becomes one of the more coveted wide receivers available. Really productive. I mean, 148 catches, 2,100 yards during his career. Has some familiarity with Chip Lindsey at UCF way back in 2021. Really good at the contested catch point. He's really good on third downs. He's that wide receiver one that, hey, it's 3rd and 7, and we need a wide receiver to get open and go make a play and extend the drive. Kind of like Cornelius Johnson was at times for Michigan. That's kind of how I see Caden Robinson. Yeah, he can win vertically down the field, make some plays with the football in the air, but he's a big body that can separate well too. And that's probably what I like most about Caden Robinson. We'll see where Michigan decides to go. Obviously, we're still looking at guys like Troy Stellato from Clemson. At this point, this to me is really the last glaring need for Michigan in the transfer portal. And I think something optimistic is, hey, what we saw from Freddie Moore in the bowl game against Alabama, that's an option for us at the wide receiver spot. That's a guy that can do some good things. There are some Michigan wide receivers that I think are better than we think they are because they just had bad quarterback play. But I think most Michigan fans who watch this team every single Saturday knows we could use some more difference makers as pass catchers, especially as you're trying to just make life as easy as possible for someone like Bryce Underwood. We'll see where Michigan decides to go. I like all 3 of these wide receivers. We'll see if Michigan still decides to add that cornerback spot. We'll cut it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.